In a dusty corner of West Africa, a man walks into the center of a crowd. A gun is raised. The trigger is pulled. Once, twice, 3 times. The crowd gasps. The man doesn't flinch. No blood, no wounds, no signs of pain. He opens his arms to the sky as the people around him erupt in disbelief. Was it a miracle, a trick, or something ancient and terrifyingly real? Stories like this aren't rare in parts of Nigeria, Togo, and Benin. They've been whispered about for generations. Rituals that grant men the power to resist bullets. Spells that cloak the body in invisible armor. Could a spiritual force really defy modern weapons? Is there a secret known only to the initiated? A power hidden in plain sight? And if so, what price must be paid to wield it? This isn't science fiction. It's called Ode-Eshi, a name that literally translates to "bullet does not penetrate." Deeply rooted in traditional African spirituality, Ode-Eshi is more than folklore. It's a practice, a ritual, a belief system, and for some, a deadly game. Passed down through secretive clans, it's said to turn ordinary men into fearless warriors. In this video, we'll trace the origins of this spiritual shield, explore how it's supposedly performed, uncover the truth behind the jaw-dropping public demonstrations, and question whether this mystical ritual is real or if it's just a dangerously convincing illusion. You'll hear from those who lived it, saw it, and even challenged it. Witnesses, believers, skeptics, and science itself, all trying to answer the same question: can faith really stop a bullet? Get ready, because we're stepping into a world where the line between myth and survival is razor thin. Ode-Eshi. The name rolls off the tongue like a whisper of defiance. In Yoruba, it means bullet does not penetrate, but its power lies far beyond language. For many, it's not just a phrase, it's a pact, a promise, a spiritual covenant that shields the body from harm. Those who believe in it will tell you that bullets can be rendered useless with the right rites, the right invocations, and the right faith. But to understand the gravity of that claim, we need to step back into the cultural and historical framework where it was born. Ode-Eshi is rooted deeply in West African cosmology, particularly among the Yoruba, Igbo, Fon, and Iwe-speaking peoples. Though variations exist, the core idea remains strikingly consistent. Through ritual, spiritual alignment, and initiation, the human body can be made immune to physical weapons. In rural communities of Nigeria, Benin, and Togo, where modern medicine and law enforcement were once scarce, protection often came not from technology but from the unseen. Spiritual power was the only armor available, and Ode-Eshi was the ultimate form of it. Interestingly, there is no single ritual manual or doctrine. In some regions, it's practiced by herbal priests known as babalawos or dibia. In others, it's carried out by underground spiritual militias or community elders who serve as both protectors and enforcers. The term itself may change, but the essence, the belief in spiritual invincibility, cuts across names and borders. Some tribes refer to it as Agbara Iku, power against death, others as Egun Oko, ghost shield. But all point toward a common truth. The power to resist harm is thought to be spiritually granted, not physically earned. The process of Ode-Eshi is enveloped in secrecy. Outsiders are rarely told the full extent of the practice. What we do know comes from scattered oral testimonies, rare documentaries, and whispered tales passed through generations. Some say it begins with a spiritual cleansing, followed by ingestion or application of sacred herbs. Others describe blood pacts involving animals or even symbolic weapons. The more extreme versions involve psychological conditioning, chants, and isolation, a form of spiritual boot camp that tests the initiate's limits. Ode-Eshi isn't just about being bulletproof. At its core, it's about control. Control over fear, over violence, over one's own fate. For communities constantly under threat from war, colonial repression, or crime, Ode-Eshi offered more than protection. It offered psychological liberation. Believers claim it empowers the soul, fortifies the body, and instills courage where there was once only terror. Whether or not it truly works in a physical sense, its power in shaping behavior and belief is undeniable. But here's where it gets complicated. As stories of spiritual bulletproofing spread, so did the blurred line between truth and performance. Could the ritual really stop bullets? Or was it more about making a man fearless enough to walk through gunfire believing he would survive? To the untrained eye, the Ode-Eshi ritual might appear like a chaotic blend of herbs, chants, and blood. But to those who have undergone it, it's a transformation, a rebirth into something beyond human. Initiation is not simply a matter of belief. It is an ordeal, a trial by fire that tests one's courage, commitment, and connection to the spiritual realm. Only those deemed worthy by both the physical and spiritual community are allowed to proceed. And once you step into it, there's no turning back. Initiates are often brought into secluded forests, shrines, or hidden compounds. These are sacred spaces far from the gaze of the uninitiated. The first step is purification, bathing in water infused with sacred herbs, ashes, or animal blood. This isn't symbolic hygiene. It's believed to cleanse the spirit, opening the body to receive spiritual energy. Some initiates are stripped of their old clothes and names, marking the death of their former selves. Then come the herbs, secret concoctions created by spiritual specialists. Some are applied directly to the skin, creating marks or patterns believed to act as spiritual armor. Others are ingested, said to bind the spirit of the person to the protection of the ancestors. The taste, by all accounts, is bitter, a harsh reminder that power does not come without pain. In some cases, the initiate must recite ancient incantations while facing a fire or blade, reinforcing their bond to the spiritual world with every breath. Blood is often involved, usually from chickens, goats, or rams. It's used to anoint the body, weapons, or sacred objects. Some claim the blood is mixed with special powders and rubbed into cuts on the skin, believed to embed the spiritual protection into the initiate's flesh. It's violent, it's graphic. But within the belief system, it's not cruelty, it's sacrifice, a necessary exchange between the human and the divine. Chants fill the air during the process. Sometimes they're whispers, sometimes they're thunderous. The words don't just sound powerful, they're believed to invoke specific deities, spirits, and forces that grant invincibility. The language may be ancient or coded, only understood by those within the tradition. In that moment, the initiate is no longer just a man. He becomes a vessel, part human, part spirit. The final stage varies by region, but in many traditions, the ultimate test is symbolic confrontation. The initiate may be struck with a machete, blade, or stick, while elders chant protective verses. If no wound appears, it is seen as a sign that the ritual has worked. In rare and controversial instances, live bullets are used. Most believe these demonstrations are carefully controlled or symbolic, but others swear they witnessed real power, bullets falling to the ground, unable to penetrate. The entire ritual is wrapped in mystery, even to those who've been through it. The power of Ode-Eshi doesn't lie in science. It lies in belief, in symbolism, in the bond between a person and a world that exists just beyond the visible. And once that bond is sealed, the initiate walks away with more than just a title. They walk away with the unshakable conviction that no weapon formed against them shall prosper. The belief in Ode-Eshi might sound mythical, but its most compelling and controversial moments happen in the real world, right in front of cameras and witnesses. Across West Africa, there have been public demonstrations where men are shot at, beaten with machetes, or burned with fire, and they walk away unharmed. These events have stirred awe, debate, and fear, and they remain some of the most powerful visuals tied to the belief in spiritual invincibility. Perhaps the most infamous examples come from local vigilante groups like the Bakassi Boys in southeastern Nigeria. Known for brutal justice and spiritual rituals, these self-styled enforcers claimed Ode-Eshi-like powers. Videos surfaced showing them walking into dangerous situations with guns drawn on them, yet walking away untouched. In some cases, bullets were fired directly at them and appeared to fall to the ground. Skeptics called it trickery. Believers called it proof. In Togo and Benin, traditional priests have performed public tests in village squares. A man kneels, a gun is raised, a single shot echoes through the air, and nothing happens. Onlookers cheer, some drop to their knees in worship, others stare in stunned silence. While many of these events have never been independently verified, they've been recorded and shared across mobile phones, social media, and television broadcasts, feeding the legend further. One particularly haunting case comes from a 1999 incident in Nigeria, where a young man reportedly survived 5 gunshots during an armed robbery attempt. Witnesses claimed the bullets bounced off his chest as if repelled by an invisible shield. The police detained him and confiscated his garments and charms. During interrogation, he insisted he had been spiritually protected. The police, in disbelief, performed a test. This time, the bullets didn't bounce. He was critically injured. Was it a failed second ritual, or did the magic only work when faith was pure? Stories like these blur the line between reality and performance. In some villages, people swear they've seen men with machetes swing at their own stomachs without drawing blood. Others tell of warriors who bathe in fire or lie calmly as hot iron is pressed against their skin. The most devout insist these are not illusions, but evidence of divine power. Critics, however, suggest everything from sleight of hand to psychological manipulation. They point out how fear, pressure, and community expectation can create an atmosphere where spectacle becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. But whether these demonstrations are real or staged, one truth remains: they serve a powerful social function. They reinforce belief, create local heroes, and deepen the spiritual connection between people and their traditions. In a world full of chaos, the idea that anyone can stand unharmed in the face of death, offers not just inspiration, but hope. And sometimes, hope is its own kind of bulletproof. For generations, Ode-Eshi has thrived in a world governed by spirit, ritual, and faith. But what happens when that world collides with modern science? Can belief alone stop a bullet? Or is there a deeper psychological and physiological explanation behind the phenomenon? The answers, as it turns out, are as complex as the ritual itself. From a scientific perspective, there is no known material or biological condition that allows the human body to become truly bulletproof without the use of technology. Ballistics experts point to the undeniable physics of projectile velocity, body mass, and energy transfer. Simply put, a bullet traveling at high speed will cause damage, no matter how strong someone's belief system might be. So how do we explain those stories? The machete demonstrations? The bullet tests? The miraculous survivals? One theory centers around placebo and the power of suggestion. Just as sugar pills have been shown to relieve pain when a patient believes in them, rituals like Ode-Eshi could trigger a strong psychological shift. When someone is absolutely convinced they are protected, reinforced by a lifetime of cultural belief and community affirmation, their body may react differently. Pain thresholds can rise, fear diminishes, adrenaline surges. This isn't magic. It's biology responding to deep belief. Another explanation involves controlled environments and sleight of hand. In many public demonstrations, the person firing the gun may be part of the ritual or complicit in the performance. Blank rounds, low-caliber weapons, or carefully aimed shots that intentionally miss can create the illusion of invincibility. Even machetes may be dulled or swung in a way that causes minimal contact. These tactics, if true, don't necessarily diminish the ritual's importance. They highlight how performance and perception intertwine. Anthropologists studying West African rituals argue that the power of belief systems isn't in their literal truth, but in their social utility. Ode-Eshi, like many spiritual traditions, functions as a tool for community cohesion, mental fortitude, and even law enforcement. In communities lacking strong legal institutions, the belief that someone is spiritually protected can create both fear and respect, keeping violence at bay not because of bullets, but because of belief. Still, this raises ethical concerns. What happens when someone truly believes they are invincible, walks into real danger, and discovers too late that belief isn't enough? There are documented cases of individuals dying in gunfights, their bodies found with charms or herbs sewn into their clothing. In those moments, faith meets fatal consequences. And for critics, this is where Ode-Eshi becomes most troubling, when belief overrides caution and spiritual confidence becomes reckless courage. Science can't measure spirits, it can't quantify fear or test conviction in a lab, but it can offer frameworks to understand why people might appear bulletproof, even if they're not. And in doing so, it helps us realize that Ode-Eshi isn't just about protection. It's about the unshakable human need to believe in something greater than the self, especially when facing the barrel of a gun. For every tale of survival, there's another drenched in tragedy. Behind the spectacle of invincibility, Ode-Eshi has a darker undercurrent, one filled with loss, deceit, and exploitation. The very belief that offers protection and pride has also led many to their deaths, often in silence, away from the cameras and the cheering crowds. There have been real cases, not myths, of individuals who, convinced of their spiritual bulletproofing, walked into combat or confrontation and never walked out. Some were local vigilantes who believed their ritual had rendered them immune to gunfire. Others were criminals who thought they were untouchable. And then there were the ordinary citizens, pulled into conflicts by belief, their bodies later found riddled with bullets, their charms and spiritual tokens still clutched tightly in their hands. In 2003, a disturbing case from Edo State in Nigeria made headlines. A group of young men, said to have recently completed an Ode-Eshi initiation, attacked a police checkpoint. They believed the bullets would bounce. They didn't. The entire group was gunned down in minutes. Local elders tried to explain that the ritual had not been completed properly, that the spirits had not yet accepted them. But the outcome was undeniable. Belief alone wasn't enough. And where there is belief, there are those willing to exploit it. Some self-proclaimed spiritualists and fake priests have turned Ode-Eshi into a business, charging desperate men large sums of money for herbs, chants, or protection rituals. They sell the illusion of safety. The promises are bold: invincibility, power, fearlessness. But when tested, these claims often collapse. Tragically, by the time the truth is revealed, it's often too late. These scams aren't just unethical, they're deadly, and they're not limited to remote villages. In cities like Lagos, Accra, and Cotonou, spiritual protection services are advertised openly. Bulletproof rituals are marketed like insurance policies. Some even come with guarantees and certificates. But behind the confident sales pitch is often nothing more than a dangerous illusion. Even more chilling is how some groups use Ode-Eshi to manipulate young boys into becoming soldiers or enforcers. By convincing them that they're spiritually invincible, leaders send them into dangerous missions with no real protection. In these cases, Ode-Eshi becomes a tool not of empowerment, but of control. A weapon of psychological warfare that leaves its victims both physically and spiritually unprotected. Governments and human rights organizations have attempted to intervene, warning communities about the risks and exposing fraudsters. But the power of belief runs deep. And for many, the idea of spiritual protection is more comforting than the cold, clinical logic of science. The scars left behind by these tragedies are not just physical, they're emotional, cultural, and generational. This is the other side of the coin. Ode-Eshi as a belief inspires courage, but when misused, misunderstood, or monetized, it can also fuel recklessness, tragedy, and manipulation. It's a stark reminder that the line between faith and false hope is thinner than a bullet's path. Strip away the mystery, the danger, and the demonstrations, and what remains at the heart of Ode-Eshi is something profoundly human. A symbol. More than a spiritual shield, Ode-Eshi embodies a culture's resistance to fear, oppression, and mortality. In many West African societies, the belief isn't just about stopping bullets, it's about standing tall in the face of overwhelming force. It's about reclaiming agency in a world where violence often feels inescapable. Historically, the practice carried immense psychological power. In regions plagued by conflict, colonial invasions, and systemic violence, Ode-Eshi became a declaration of autonomy. It wasn't just a tool of war, it was an act of defiance. To wear the spiritual armor of Ode-Eshi was to say, "You do not own my fate." It turned vulnerable men into warriors, not necessarily because it made them immune, but because it made them fearless. And fearlessness is often more powerful than any weapon. Even today, traces of that symbolism live on. In music, film, and pop culture across Nigeria and Ghana, Ode-Eshi references appear as metaphors for strength and survival. Lyrics mention walking bulletproof, not as a literal claim, but as a badge of spiritual toughness. Nollywood films frequently depict scenes of Ode-Eshi rituals, mixing suspense with reverence, adding to the legend and reinforcing its place in the collective imagination. For the diaspora, particularly African descendants disconnected from ancestral rituals, Ode-Eshi carries a different weight. It symbolizes lost knowledge, forgotten power, and a yearning for reconnection. In spiritual circles abroad, discussions of African protection rituals like Ode-Eshi are growing, often blended with modern spiritualism, ancestral veneration, and cultural pride. Yet for all its mystique, Ode-Eshi is not frozen in time. Modern practitioners, especially in urban areas, are evolving the tradition. Some reinterpret it as a mental state, a metaphor for resilience rather than literal invincibility. Others link it with broader African spiritual systems like Ifa or Vodun, emphasizing moral alignment, spiritual discipline, and energetic protection over physical immunity. In this sense, Ode-Eshi becomes less about dodging bullets and more about spiritual balance, a path to wholeness in a fractured world. Still, its roots in protection, in resistance, remain firmly planted. Whether invoked in rituals, music, or whispered stories, Ode-Eshi serves as a mirror reflecting both the vulnerabilities and strengths of African identity. It reminds communities that in a world of uncertainty, the greatest shield may not be physical armor, but belief. Belief in tradition, in ancestors, in spirit, and most importantly, in oneself. As myths evolve and cultures adapt, the legacy of Ode-Eshi endures. Not because of its ability to stop bullets, but because of its ability to make people feel unbreakable in the moments they need it most. So, does Ode-Eshi really work? That's the question that has haunted every story, every ritual, and every demonstration we've explored. On one side you have believers, people who have felt its power, seen bullets drop, and walked through danger with nothing but faith. On the other side you have skeptics, pointing to trickery, psychology, and the limits of human biology. And in between lies something more mysterious, the space where belief becomes reality. Not because it changes the laws of physics, but because it changes the way people live. Maybe the bullets weren't meant to be literal. Maybe Ode-Eshi was never just about stopping guns, but about starting courage. In a world where violence is all too real, where safety is a privilege and not a guarantee, belief systems like Ode-Eshi gave people something modern science often can't: a sense of power in powerlessness. We've seen how the ritual can inspire strength, but also how it can lead to tragedy. We've explored how it's used to protect, manipulate, perform, and connect. And now, as the dust settles, one truth remains. Ode-Eshi is not just a spiritual vest, it's a cultural mirror. It reflects the fears, hopes, and resilience of communities who've had to find protection not in steel, but in spirit. Whether you believe it works or not, you can't deny its impact. And maybe, just maybe, the real magic isn't in the herbs, the chants, or the rituals, but in the stories that live on long after the smoke clears. If you found this story eye-opening, mysterious, or even a little unsettling, then hit that like button, share it with someone who loves hidden histories, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful deep dives into the secrets the world forgets to tell.